Welcome to another episode of the Legal Ops Podcast, the show about legal operations technology and the business of law. I am the purported host, Daryl Osuch, and I am joined by the actual guest out here in a much more friendly time zone for both myself and him, Maurice Rabb.
Yeah, hello,
Happy,
hello.
what is this, Friday?
Yeah, we're gonna timestamp it a little bit, but yeah, it's Friday,
Timestamp it a little bit.
and it seems like we're twinning here. This is the legal operations uniform.
this is the this is you know what I default to black. One of the other guests, who's a good buddy of mine, like teased me about like, oh,
Well, I default to
I
black
know,
every
like
day. No,
zing, coming in hot. Um, yeah,
yeah,
for those of you listening online, you may not get that joke, but I encourage you to watch the video. Um,
right.
Maurice, hello, welcome. We've known each other out here in Tokyo for a couple of years, and it hasn't been consistent across those couple of years because, you know, obviously the biggest thing would be COVID, but
Yes.
then you moving around, I was moving around. Jobs and functions and roles in Japan. But I think I, if my very poor memory serves me correctly, um, we may have initially met at like a legal hackers event, maybe in 2018, maybe.
Maybe. So I think it's probably uh an event in December of 2018, probably still around 2018, about operations, like e-discovery, etc.,
Yeah,
at in Marunouchi
yeah.
area. So it definitely wasn't legal hackers, because that was my
That was your
event.
that.
So I think I met you. I think I met you before I started the legal
Yeah,
hackers group here in
but you were
Tokyo.
doing, I mean, talk to me for a little bit, because for some of our international listeners,
Hmm.
people out in Europe and the United States, where perhaps hackathons are normal or a thing, or very heavy influence between technology and the practice of law, like that wasn't that common out here when you were sort of doing
Yeah.
that. So like, talk to me about how that started, why you did that, or the need at the time.
So looking at kind of the legal hackers space, that was around 2018, and that's when technology, particularly in the US, was really exploding, and a lot of new technology companies or legal tech related companies were coming up. And I wanted to start and have some conversations here in Japan. So I actually reached out to a group that I'd heard about legal hackers, and said, I don't see a Tokyo branch or a Tokyo chapter. Um, can I start one? And usually they're like, we usually want two or three people, or we want
Mm,
several people to be a part of it. But kind of looking at your background, which I can get into a
mm,
bit later, they're like, yeah, go ahead and start it. So around in 2018, I started hosting and doing a lot of legal
mm,
hacker events, but basically it's just around
yeah,
technology. And as we continue to talk, I'm very deliberate in using the term legal technology versus legal AI, because everyone always talks about AI,
yeah,
AI, AI, and but there have been technologies around for more than a
yeah,
decade now, or decades, that sometimes people underestimate. So that's how I got started: is small community, getting
yeah,
people together. I do want to send a shout out to AWS. I'm not represented by them, but AWS was definitely one of the community
mm,
sponsors in terms of helping us go to their space and be able to host
yeah,
some events there. And we also just started at some local
yeah,
places, getting a group of people, 10, 15, having some
yeah,
beers or wine, or or soda water if you don't drink. So that's kind
Yeah,
of how it started.
which, you know,
Yeah.
I find, and you can speak to this more. I think you've been out in Japan longer. You've been out, you know, in a legal and or technology space longer than me, perhaps. But I find that like that kind of casual networking, that kind of casual event, not super common in Tokyo, right? Like it was a little bit to me refreshing to go to that event where it felt more like a Western style of of, of networking, right? Um, but yeah, it was super cool. So yeah, we've just circa 2018, I think,
Right.
is
Yeah.
when we met each other. But um, maybe that's actually a good point to pause for a beat and then give you some time and space to kind of explain a bit more of your background because you know I just alluded to right now. Like you've been out here a while um, in both you know a legal and technology role. So tell the people a bit about yourself.
Yeah, yeah. So not, as they say, not to quite date yourself, but I have to date myself a bit. But this is not an evergreen content because things are gonna change in the
In
in
two
the
days.
space. It
Yeah,
could
yeah,
change
yeah.
tomorrow. So it's not like we're saving this for evergreen. But as we're recording this is 2026, and uh, I came in Japan in 2006.
Oh,
So people who do their math, they can do the numbers. I'm not gonna. And part of the reason I came here is I had a good opportunity to work for a big international law firm here as an associate. Big law as we say in the world. And I really plan on coming for a few years, get some good foundation training. And my interest was more China related from undergrad and just where I saw things were going. So I was going to be here for a few years and then transferred maybe to the
yeah.
China office and worked as a finance and a real estate lawyer at that time. Did some M&A, so mostly on the corporate side. As I say to my friends, if you're going to court, probably not going to call me because I'm not a
Okay.
litigator. But if you want to, create some structures, call me. So I was going to be here for a few years and then leave. Lehman happened. That's 2008, 2009. If people were not quite familiar, and uh, we were very busy
Yeah.
at the firm. I worked for Morrison and Forrester. It's easy to find MoFo, as we say. So I worked at MoFo, and we were very busy. 2 years turned to 5 years, 5 years turned to 10, 10 turned to 15. As a lot of people say. But then I did leave the practice of law for a few years to do education. Before I became a lawyer, I was a teacher, elementary school teacher. So education, professional development, it's a huge theme. It's something that's very central to me, and it kind of is the reason that led to my interest in tech, legal tech. But left for practice for a few years, did that, worked for MPO there, and then I came back to practice, and I worked for a Japanese law firm, one of the big Japanese law firms, Anderson Mori Tomosune, which was a really interesting and very wonderful experience. Coming from like U.S. style big law, and now you're working at a big Japanese firm. And there I had an interesting role where I was not only practicing law, but doing a lot of training and coaching, given my background. But the real pivot, and this is kind of into where we're going with legal tech and legal operations, is Mofo asked me to come back to kind of run recruitment and attorney development. So I went back to Mofo Tokyo, to help do recruiting, attorney development, diversity inclusion type of work. And when I came back, what was happening in the US compared to technology was several years ahead of when I left as a lawyer. And I was like, oh my God, how are we going to train junior lawyers? What kind of work are they going to work on? And I started really thinking about that at that time. And that was 2015. So people who are talking about generative AI and training lawyers now, in 2026, I could see that as something that was something that we needed to address. 10 years ago, more than 10 years now. And looking at the technology, looking at some of the training, some of the things that were happening in the US. And as a recruiter, if I'm bringing over new associates and helping train them, I got to make sure we have the processes and systems to train them. So that's when I started looking more into legal tech, what was happening, what were the different groups. The Corporate Legal Operations Consortium, CLOC, was starting to get really big at that time, and that is also, even though that's more in-house related, that's still related to the legal industry. So yeah, that's where I started, and that was 2015, 2017. Really started doing a lot in the legal tech space. Yeah, so um, that's kind of the historical. Now, the kind of fast forward, and I'm sure we'll talk a bit more about it today. But as of today, my day job is working at LexisNexis, which is one of the large legal data analytics, data research, or legal research. We also have a lot of workflow systems, and I'm working there and really trying to kind of bridge that gap between traditional legal work and traditional thinking about legal, and where we are today with a variety of tools and generative AI, other AI, etc. So I'll pause there.
That's no.
Like I said, it's been 20
It's
years,
20
so
years.
there's a
I
lot
mean,
of
that's
history, a lot of things to talk about.
I
That in
think
of itself could be a whole
that's
podcast. So.
far better, more concise, summary of 20 years than I could do. Um,
Yeah.
Question: Is Are technology and legal technology different?
Yes.
Tell me why.
So the technology, when I use that just term technology, that's just a tool, right? So any tool that you're using, even some people call a will a technology, or certain frameworks, even the rule of law, right? Which we talk about as lawyers, that concept of the rule of law. We have laws, we have to follow them, we try to follow them. That would be a technology, right? So I would still call that a technology. The iPhone or email, what people are used to today, uh, what we're recording on today, is a technology. Legal technology, I come from the view that it's even heightened, right? Because we have, particularly as lawyers or in the legal profession, we have fiduciary duty, we have duties to really serve our clients, right? And I also believe serve society. So legal technology is technology that's in the subset of technology that's for the legal industry, that has the highest compliance, has the highest responsibilities to society. And we can't just do random things, because it's fun or it looks good. And it's important. So there's a phrase I always use that I think relates to this. My phrase is: passion without skills don't pay the bills. Passion without skills don't pay the bills. And it's okay to be passionate about technology. And that's why you asked me the difference between technology, legal technology. It's great to be passionate about technology. But if you don't have the skills and some of the underlying things that are happening, for example, attorneys submitting hallucinating cases, part of that's a skills related issue. But if you don't have the skills, you're going to have some issues and you're not going to be able to pay those bills unless you're paying the what do we say, you're paying the
You're
fines.
paying the
You
fines,
got to
yeah.
pay that, you got to pay those bills.
Paying your,
Does that make
yeah,
sense? I
yeah.
don't know what's your. I want to turn it back to you. Like for you, I know you're the
It's
interviewer, but I want to turn it back. So for you, what
well,
are your thoughts on
in
the difference between
interestingly,
technology and skills? Yeah,
I
or
would have
technology.
disagreed with you up until the very end, where you said that legal technology is a subset of technology, and that there are sort of other factors that require or necessitate sort of the highest levels of kind of quality, sort of duties, et cetera, et cetera. I think that becomes a little bit more convincing to say
Mm.
that legal technology is or should be different. Um, I think this topic, it occurs to me that this topic could be a bit of a rabbit hole, which is interesting because again, I think fundamentally you and I do disagree, which is I love to play in that space because I think that right now today, or maybe even up till just a couple years ago, I think that your distinction of technology versus legal technology is true. I think that we might be in a moment right now, and we'll see in the next couple of years where it the distinction blurs and it's just technology, right? And I'm thinking of, for example, the Claude Code plugin that allows for a little bit more sort of legal workflow handling, um, where if you combine that with kind of vibe coding, if you combine that with creativity and kind of hackathon approaches, a lot of people can do a bunch of stuff themselves outside the bounds of the product marketing field of legal technology, and at a level that maybe doesn't meet the sort of the highest compliance levels of the legal technology definition that you give. But I think that potentially it could be changing. We we shall see. We shall see.
Right. In terms of and to sort of do an and it's really good to get your thoughts on that. And again, the difference in where I would separate it is if you look at the terms and conditions of Claude and all of these, they all have a carve out for legal. They all have a carve out for health. And if something happens with their technology and you try to sue them, they're going to say you cannot because it's in the terms of conditions. Whereas we're talking about a plane ride, if you're on a plane, an airplane is technology as well. So if something happens, if you're on the plane or a Shinkansen, which is the bullet train or the fast train for people not familiar in the US or for Japan. So if you're in the Shinkansen or you are in the airplane and it crashes, you go to the company and say, was it maintenance? Did you do the maintenance? Did you do what you needed to do? Whereas if something happens with technology, and in this case, Claude, which isn't legal technology, but if something happens with technology, they're going to be like, we
We
told
told you
you
not to.
to consult your
Yeah.
lawyer. We told you that you can't rely on it. So that's why I'm adamant about making that distinction and saying if you're using generative AI to plan your trip, that's one thing. If you're using generative AI to plan your kid's birthday party, that's one thing, right? That today's my birthday
Oh.
for the
Ooh.
recording. So you even got me on my birthday. More timestamps, but if you're planning it for that, that's one thing. But if you're using generative AI to draft a contract and it messes up, if you have a lawyer, the lawyer has malpractice insurance. The lawyer you can sue, you can talk to you. But if you go to Claude or you go to Anthropic or any of the big companies, they're going to be like, what? Did you read the terms and conditions? It's the terms and conditions say that we're not liable. You had your own risk. So that's why, at least today, if that changes, if we can go after them for liability later, then I can say maybe they've merged. But as long as I have to keep my bar up, as long as I have to do CLEs to stay up to date, as long as someone can go to the California bar and report me for doing bad services, regardless of how I do it, it ain't the same. And legal tech, obviously like LexisNexis, of course, that's where I am, and other people that are at similar types of companies, we take that very seriously. And we have the certain safeguards where you're not coming to LexisNexis or some of the
Yeah.
other people and saying, it's on you. That's part of our terms and
This.
conditions. So that's again, it's subtle, and I can see
No.
what you're
No.
saying about later and merging, but that's how I sort of, it's about
Yeah. And
accountability.
it's a.
Who's
Yeah.
accountable and who is using judgment for what's happening with these types of
Yeah.
tools? Because It's a
Yeah.
tool, and you can't sue a tool. I can't put ChatGPT on the stand,
This is
right? But you can put Maurice Rabb
yeah.
on the stand. So that's the reason why I
It's
make that
again. I
distinction.
think this is
Yeah.
in spite of the fact that we
Yeah.
disagree. I think that this is a compelling distinction again because
Yes.
tools in what is known as the legal tech space are
Hmm.
sort of making a warrant to kind of say here are particular use cases. If you're inside of those
Hmm.
bounds, kind of
We
you're
agree on
good,
that.
right?
Yeah, that's an agreement.
Whereas
Yes.
again, the technology writ large, here is an LLM, which is a stochastic predictive language model. It doesn't
Hmm.
understand things. It spits out some content. You can do so many things with that technology, but right, and that's a big but, and that's the distinction between technology and legal technology, and that's just really that's really interesting. Also, another thing, I like, it sounds like you and I do agree. One of your comments there was maybe pushing a bit more responsibility onto the the lawyers or legal professionals who use the technology, right? Because we have obligations, and I've been a big, you know, we still look. There's seems like still every week or every month there's another lawyer submitted a case with hallucinated sites anecdote, right? But we've it seems like across the last couple of years we've finally shifted into, the judges know what to do. The judges are saying, hey lawyer, you put your name on this brief. That's your responsibility. I don't want to hear about the tool. I can ask you, did you use generative AI? Fine. But like, you have an obligation to validate this stuff. You failed your obligation. That's on you. I don't somehow I don't think that gets talked about enough. But again, this is a bit of a rabbit hole.
Yeah, yeah, and just to talk about that kind of the professional responsibility, the the submission of it, I think the discussion about hallucinated cases, I think that's a distraction, right? And there are lots of articles about that, and this is my own view. And part of it is like I teach legal research and writing, at Temple University, and even when we went to law school 20, 25 years ago, they always talked about being honest or being accurate of the cases you use, right? And that was the whole reason why the various legal research companies came up with case notes and headings. And that legal research element. That is what the best lawyers were doing. They were going and digging and trying to find the right case, in the common law. And sometimes they were being disingenuous with how they were using the cases. Right. And that's why the judges have clerks, right? And the clerks are like, well, that's not what that case said. Right, or that's dictum, or that was in the dissent, right? So in terms of how we're using cases and the hallucination of the case, I think that's the wrong framing of the conversation. The conversation is these tools, the technology, as you say, produce text so fast, so believable that you have to read it very critically. And if you're busy or if you're doing many cases or you're not that familiar with that area of law, which happens a lot too, now you're going to be persuaded to go there. So putting the hallucination case isn't really a technology issue. It's not a hallucination issue, in my opinion. It's a lazy lawyer issue. Or a framing issue, but it's easier. Even myself, like I was talking with someone just the other day. I was like, yeah, I just created today. I was talking with someone and I said, I did some deep research and it went out. It took 30 minutes. It created like a 50-page document. Right. And I'm like, oh my God. But now if I really want to
Yeah,
understand it and really want to do it, I got to
you
sit
got to
down and
read.
read through 50 pages. And I'm not going to use the generative AI to create me a 50-page document and just say
Yeah.
summarize it. Right. So I have to sit down and read it. So where I am, and this goes again to my education and training and what I'm thinking about, and particularly about legal, we got to read more, not less.
Me too.
And that's what I think is gonna. That's what changes it. So that's my
Yeah.
hallucination is I'm thinking these people are not reading. They ain't reading. You need to do some reading.
I don't
So those are my
I
thoughts.
I feel like we should go to like a law school career day, and someone's like, what are the skills? Be like,
Yes.
you need to read better. Just read better. Just learn better judgment. You know.
Seriously, that's what I say. That's exactly what I read more now than
Yeah.
before, right? Because I read it everything. Like I read more now and
Yeah.
deeper reading,
I want to come
right?
back to that a bit
Yeah.
later. You've mentioned. I want to shift topics a bit. You mentioned Temple, and I didn't know that you were a teacher back in the day, or that you had sort of certain kinds
Hmm.
of roles at MoFo. But it sounds like you've throughout your career so far done a bit of, I mean, training and development generally, but like at a point at which
Hmm.
you're working at a law school, and talking about emerging topics like generative AI, or just invested in growth of up and coming lawyers. Like, just talk a bit about what you do at Temple. Why? It sounds like you've been doing it for a while, so you don't hate it. What do you get out of it?
Right. So I think and we've exchanged emails, but one of in my signature, I write, the illiterate of this, 21st century of this time is not those that can't read and write, but those that cannot learn, unlearn, relearn. Right. And to some extent, I'm even questioning the read and write part now in the generative AI time because, that's difficult for humans. But I come at it from a human centric point of view, right? And I love technology, but when I think about the framework, they say people, processes, tools, right? Tools are technology. Some people throw in data now. I always come back to the people point, right? And as long as we're human, and I don't think we're in the matrix yet, I could be wrong, but but as long as I assume we're not in the matrix, I am still very people focused, humanistic focused, and I know some people get so excited about tech and what it can do and excitement, and I do. I use it. I like using it. It's very helpful, right? And it can be very convenient and can really emphasize. But I always still come back to the people element. And that's why I did recruitment at MoFo and attorney development, diversity inclusion. That's why I was a recruiter too, external recruiter. That's about people helping find their careers. And again, that's why I teach at Temple, where I can help. And I don't know the dancers, right? Like we were joking, like what's going to happen in a week from now? We have no idea, right? If we were recording this 2 months ago, we wouldn't be
We
talking
wouldn't be
about
talking about,
Claude
yeah,
legal plugin,
exactly. We wouldn't be
right?
talking.
I'm
I
teaching.
got
Yeah,
I got a
yeah, go
buddy of
ahead.
mine who works at a company that's sort of leveraging generative AI for manufacturing,
Yes.
and he said he sent me a message just like out of the blue, like, what's the deal with the markets? And I was like, what is he talking? I was like, oh, it's Claude.
Yeah, I
It's
know.
Claude. And
Yeah.
they're like, and suddenly, but the next day it was just like the biggest story of like market sell off. And suddenly, which is really interesting again for people in the space like you and I, suddenly like all of the major news outlets in the universe are like legal technology this, and like LinkedIn is blowing up, and
Yeah.
let's talk about it. Like,
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
feels a bit like, well, not even a bit, like we're not in the fringe anymore, right? The point at which Jim Cramer is running around talking about market sell-off, about legal technology, and Anthropic and Claude legal plugin. Like, it's a weird space to be in, especially if you never considered that your job or your career would be one of these massive kind of market moving sort of dynamics or forces.
And that's again, and what you're saying, that is one of the main reasons that I teach, right? And my class, I don't do lecture classes, right? I'm not doing a lecture, right? The class that, in March, I'll be teaching artificial intelligence law, right? And I don't even know what's it's going to
Yeah,
be like in a
yeah,
month or now from now, because things are changing. People are looking at stuff. EU's looking at, Japan's looking at stuff. US, well, we know about US to some extent, but and so the classes, particularly, legal research and writing, yeah, that's a more traditional. This is our sources, hierarchy. This is how you do certain legal analysis. That's a very traditional kind of course, right? But this one is like, I don't know, and I don't have time to follow up on everything that's happening in the world. So I also bring in and have the students, they have their own jobs, or, because some students are working, some are law students, they have their own environment. And what are you seeing in that environment that you can share in the class that we can start thinking about from a framework and from a sort of macro level of how to approach it, right? Anyone that's talking about Gen AI and not having huge talks about jobs, whether it's universal basic income or taxing, do we tax robots, all of those things, that's a major part, in my opinion, of the conversation. It's not whether generative AI can help you save an hour. What does that mean for jobs? What does that mean for other people? What does that mean for learning? So, and I don't know. So that's why I enjoy teaching, is I get to explore those things. I get to work with people in the classroom that are a captive audience, right? And particularly as a professor, they try hard to think about these things because they want a good grade, right? Whereas if I were in a bar or, out socializing, it's banter. It's like, yeah, who's better, Man United or Liverpool? Those are fun conversations to have when you're like kicking it with the boys. But those are not the style of conversations that we're having in the class. We're really thinking deeply, and what does it mean? So it has been so enriching, right? And to be honest, I also get access to some of the good tools earlier than most people, so I can play around with the tools too.
so funny.
Technology tools, yeah.
Speaking of technology and Japan, we were chatting.
Woo, that's a
Yeah,
big
I know.
topic.
We were chatting a few minutes ago, out here, and again, for some of the listeners that don't know, we again are both out in Tokyo, both out in Japan. Maurice, you
Hmm.
hinted that you've been here a bit longer than I have, but I'm at about, I think, about 11 years, maybe closing on 12. There's a movement and a discussion right now, the rules governing the practice of law in Japan. So they, I think it was last month, opened a comment period on kind of the interplay, or basically sort of leveraging generative AI or other tools inside the practice of law, right? This strikes me as a big deal. Is that fair? Again, even entertaining this idea, especially in Japan, which in Japanese business, corporate culture often can be conservative, strikes me as like is it a big deal? Is this like a potentially, seismic shift? Like what are we talking about here?
Yeah, in terms of like a seismic shift, I would say no, in that sense. In terms of, is it a big deal to start having these types of conversations? Yes. I do think it. I think it's a huge deal, and this is where, and I'm being very measured here, because what's publicly stated and what people are really discussing internally, I'm not in those discussions, so I don't know. And honestly, that's, I'm trying to talk to people, and that's part of my networking that I'm doing to, these days, is I'm trying to get insight to what's happening internally. And one thing I can say, and I will say that there are, and I don't know numbers, but I would, there are different categories And there are some people that really understand the tech, understand what's happening, digging very deep on those things, right? And as lawyers too, the law and tech, right? And then there are some people that are very tech focused and not necessarily thinking about law, the rule of law. They're thinking about tech. How do we grow? How do we scale? How do we get these tools into people's hands, right? And then I think there are some people who are hype, right? Like, for example, when I'll give the concrete example I would give is like when Claude AI came out, everyone's like, oh my God. And I'm like, yeah, you do know it runs only on Mac, right? At that time, right? Of course, I think in the last 2 days, they had a window version, but they're like, oh, this is gonna, and I'm like, how many law firms do you know run on Mac? Right. So maybe the marketing department has some Mac. Maybe,
Yeah.
maybe. But how many? And in Japan, how
I
many law
know,
firms do you
I
know
know.
run on Mac?
There's a
So that's what I
yeah,
mean by hype. Like, oh my God, the world is falling, and I'm like, yeah, but
yeah.
it hasn't even gone to
That's a
Windows yet.
funny.
Yeah, we know it's coming. We know it's coming. Of course, it's coming. Like I said, I think even a day or two they said it here. But that's the
Yeah,
hype people, right? I'm just like, what you just said doesn't
yeah.
make
That's a funny.
sense,
Again, I
right?
think
So
there's an extra layer of like humor being out here in Japan to be like that stuff doesn't run on
right.
Mac because good lord, it seems like every single Japanese company it's just like bazillions of PCs. It's just like HP
Yes.
laptops everywhere, and it's like HP, and then
Exactly.
Fujibook, and it's just like they're just absolutely everywhere. You see them on the train, and every time like I see a commercial out here for iPhone or Mac, whatever. I get commercials on YouTube, and I'm always thinking like, where
Right.
are these people? where where are they? They must be here. Again, the
Right.
creative space and graphic design and video and
So
stuff out
so
here. It
yeah.
must be, but I never see them.
Yeah, so I mean that's the Mac, but I'll put it this way, and particularly for users not
Mm,
in the US. You asked me
mm,
about AI and about these conversations. What I will say is come back to me when Japan has
yeah,
e-discovery. Or not e-discovery, I mean
e-filing.
e-filing. They've been talking about e-filing for 7, 8 years now, 10 years. Japan right now, for people who are not in Japan, and there was something on LinkedIn a few weeks ago about the fax machine. So in Japan, as far as I know, the way you file a case is you either have to go in person to the court and file it by paper, or you can fax it to the courthouse. As of today, there is no e-filing system. Now, when you're thinking about rule of law and technology and integration of technology, let's be talking about that before we're worried about can we use Gen AI
Practice law.
to
Yeah,
review
yeah,
NDA to practice law? So that's one other layer, and then the other layer again. Would love to be on a panel with a Bengoshi or a Japanese lawyer, but the other thing is in U.S. we have small claims court, right? In U.S. we have the concept of pro se. Pro se mean representing yourselves, and I'm
mm,
from the U.S., so I'm using that frame. In Japan, it's really hard for a general person to do a
yeah,
lawsuit, right? And a lawyer here may or may not take it, right? You have to pay a stamp duty, meaning you have to pay a certain amount to file the claim, so it can be
yeah,
expensive. So just because you're bringing in this technology, so now what? The general person can create their own NDA now. The general person can create their own supply chain agreement, but they can't sue on it. Right? They can't enforce it because of the way that the court system is set up. So again, I'm not in the conversations. I don't know. These are some conversations that love to get some comments, and some people that are like Maurice is
yeah.
wrong. Let's bring them back to the
Bring them
podcast,
back to the pod.
and we have a
But
chat
the
about it.
interesting thing that
Yeah.
your comments again, this topic is sort of introduced as there's this comment period for revisions on the practice of law in Japan, right?
Right.
But your comments highlight something that I've seen and I've called out time and time again, which is I hate this phrase, but it's appropriate. There's low hanging fruit here in terms of like
Yeah.
the practice of law and a lot of just structural procedural stuff. Like, what about much easier, super smooth online access e-filing as opposed to jumping way up into leveraging generative AI for final review? Like that's a again, there's literally there's much lower hanging fruit, and that pattern um, is an oft seen pattern in Japan. Like there's
No, I would say, yeah. What I would say, and this is kind of going back to the legal tech stuff. I will say that is the area where some people are focusing on, and that's why the Japanese legal tech environment have been at that level, right? They're starting at e-signature, or they're doing a plugin for Word, right? They're doing a basic review of NDAs and supply agreements. So some of the basic, or they're helping with OCR, right? Because a lot of Japanese have paper, and then you got to scan it, but it has to be scanned where it's machine readable, because if it's just a picture, it's useless. So you have to scan those documents into a system and then read them. So some of the foundational elements are here, and are some of the focus in the legal tech, Japan legal tech scene. Um, but we need more, and we need to move faster to get to the higher edge stuff, right? And if you are at a law firm, and all the partners are not sharing the data and sharing their templates, and then you bring on a system to put on top of the web search, web crawling. If your data, and this is your day-to-day job, I mean, this I'm talking to the choir, but preaching to the choir, but if your data is not set and you don't have the right data, the generative AI isn't going to produce a good
yeah.
result, because you don't have the data in the system to produce the
There's
right
two,
result.
yeah.
So these are the conversations that I want to see
You and
more
I,
of
yeah,
than just
you and I,
oh, we're going to bring in
yeah,
Claude,
you and
right?
I
So this is
have
my
talked
point. That's where
have
I'm
talked a
thinking.
little bit about
Yeah.
this, and you highlight
Yeah.
right there. You highlighted two things, and I think I'll get your comments in a second. But one is the data quality, just and that's a
Yes.
that's a known. It's frankly a growing problem when it comes to leveraging the just awesome power of generative AI. You got data quality, data format
Hmm.
issues, but the other is it's just location, right? Like it the stuff is everywhere, right? And I think is it right that you and I agree, or we've seen this in Japan? It does seem
Absolutely.
so
Absolutely.
the data is just so fractured. You talked just there about maybe even in a law firm, we're all on the same team out here, but people aren't
Yes.
sharing template. Like why wouldn't you? That's nonsense. Is that you've seen that?
Right. But it's also, and it's also, yes, and it's also reframing part of what it means to be a lawyer or a legal professional, right? And again, I was talking to in-house counsel person, and this person is like, nobody on the team wants to collect the data and clean the data, right? They don't see that as lawyer work. They see that, and to be honest, their performance, their KPIs aren't set on that. But if you're in a legal department or a compliance department, because we're talking legal, for the purposes of this podcast, but if you're in a legal department or compliance department, and no one feels it's their responsibility to help collect and sanitize and clean the data, and you're not bringing in a consultant to do it because a budget or whatever reason they don't do, how are you going to leverage it? So even if the Japanese government says, or the legal industry says, oh yeah, go ahead, use it, Gen AI, it's not going to be good, because no one feels it's their responsibility to help collect the data, right? So then you're going to have to the leadership of that team are going to have to say, we all need to do it, right? Everyone spend 2 or 3 hours a week, right? The writing the prompt and prompt engineering and looking at that's the sexy part. It's the fun part. It's the fun. All that me. Oh, my prompt is like 300 words or 1,000 words, 2,000 words. It's, they're so happy about that. And that's the LinkedIn, that's the hype stuff. Get my, follow me and comment prompt in the comments and I'll send you my prompt, right? I am kind of making fun of some of those people, I must admit, who do that as influencers. But if your company doesn't have anyone collecting and cleaning and correlating the data, right? Which is where e-discovery became popular in the beginning, for the cases. If you don't have anyone doing that, what type of material is the generative AI looking at? You just might as well have a enterprise for open that just look on the
Yeah.
website. I mean,
It,
on the web, because you're not using your own internal
and
data. So that's
yeah,
my rant. I don't know. What are your
no,
thoughts on this? Am I wrong? Like, you're
no,
more in house. Like, I'm coming at it from an outside point of view and stories, not my
no,
day to
no,
day
but
work. So,
but I enjoy that we have different perspectives on this, but it does seem like we're arriving at the same conclusion, right? Like very,
right.
I, you know, I look, my hot take here simply is that the organization's law firm in-house team does not matter that have better organized data will do better with generative AI tools. Any kind of generative AI tools, any kind of legal technology. Um, I also think, and this is very related, I think that the practice or the area of knowledge management um, will become more important as people
Yes.
slowly realize, oh, it's something you just said. And again, we didn't even talk about this exact point, but something you just said, like if supervisors say make 2 hours a week, organize some stuff, like be better about your literally data management. That's a knowledge management
Yes.
thing. That's part of establishing knowledge management culture. A lot of places don't do that, or it's imperfect, or frankly it's a struggle to sell it to the frontline staff who are busy. But look, the organizations, the teams that can get it right can use the tools much faster. They can actually extract additional value out of stuff that's already done. They can start to look at,
Hmm.
to me it is, they will be able to actually be agile, right? By which I mean, you know,
Yes.
uh, there's, the good example is Russia. Like this country invades another country. I need to know all of our sanction exposure right now, and we
Hmm.
need to change this clause to for all of these types of contracts going forward. And if you don't have your house in order, that activity could take months to find all of that.
Yes.
Or, look, real talk, if that stuff is on, even let's say a common accessible example, if it's just SharePoint, but that SharePoint is very nicely organized and there's real
Hmm.
standard file naming conventions and blah 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 blah, you could do this activity with some searching, leverage some generative AI tools for first pass to get some analysis, and it could take you a couple weeks in house. But the fact is,
Hmm.
no one has no one has their house in order to be able to do that, right? So
Right.
I'm convinced that people that realize this general practice of knowledge management will just become more valuable. It'll have a bit more urgency.
Right. And yeah, to add on that, and like I said, that kind of goes back to the passion without skills don't pay the bills, right? And if you're having, again, just a passion about using the technology, and we heard so much about prompt engineering as one of the skills. Oh, that's a job. That's the skill you really need to know. But the knowledge management element, right, which is part of the process, right?
Yes.
People,
Yep.
process, technology. And then having the people and having process for managing knowledge, that's a skill, right? That's what people do. There are people, that's their expertise, is librarians and knowledge managers. I've seen some firms now have chief knowledge managers in Japan. That's
Yeah.
great. I'm like, you should. That I think it's a decade old. but but because I've been saying this, I got some receipts on that, but I'll share that offline. But but yeah, it's great if you're a firm or you're a large legal department and you don't have a chief knowledge officer or someone that it's their job to make sure that you're collecting the knowledge, and then other people in the company or the department, etc., know they need to work with them to help collect that. It's going to be hard because we already know how LLMs work. So if you have a LLM and you have bad data mixed in with good data, and it's very convincing, and it's giving you what the predicting the next word. What if that next word came from the old form? What if that word came from the version 2, but we had a highly negotiated situation and we want version 10, right? And of course, you can be kind of slick with the prompts, but that wastes more time. That's a lot of time, So, and yes, playbooks, that's, part of why people are creating the playbooks, etc., to try to weed out some of the bad data. And I do think it's a good triage. But if we're getting very, very large systems like a Claude, like you said, a Claude legal AI plugin searches everything on your local drive, everything, right? And yes, you can prompt it not to search a certain folder, but you know what you mean? That means you got to have a separate folder to say don't search search only this folder. You know what that means? That's knowledge management. so so that's where things are, and I'm excited about it, right? Like, on the one hand, in some ways it's painful because now I know I have to read everything, even I have to read things very closely. Right. That was the fun part about red lines. Red lines, when we are in practice, and people who may not practice as much, the red line is, most of the agreement hasn't changed. And then the other side has made some changes and there's a red line to it. And usually they, in sophisticated deals, they'll have a note why they made the change. So then now when you go, you just look at the red line, you look at the change, you look at the rationale, and then you decide and you negotiate on it. But now with Gen AI, I'm like, man, what might be missing in the red line? That's also part of the agreement that was changed. So then so you just hypersensitive,
You
and doing some
yeah
of this reading.
you
Yeah.
and we talked a few minutes ago about reading, basically, like that is an
Yes.
undervalued skill still. And I think you're right. The interesting thing is, I was having a conversation on LinkedIn the other day, um and talking to you now makes me think that there's a shift and it's happening right now, and it will continue to happen, which is reading for knowledge, or a lawyer or legal professional's chief value proposition was knowledge. I'm reading for
Hmm.
knowledge. That's changing, or has changed, into I'm reading to hone judgment. Like, I
Yes.
don't
Yes.
I
Good
no longer
framing. I like,
need
yes.
the knowledge acquisition and the knowledge manipulation. It unquestionably can be done better, faster, potentially more accurate by a machine, potentially, asterisk. But I still need to do that validation. I still need to read. You gave another example earlier about making like a 50-page research document out of generative AI. Are you going to use generative AI to do that summary? Then rely on that summary, because then you have a
Yeah.
degradation problem. But the shift right now to sort of reading to hone my judgment, like, is this is this good? And some of that is, some of that can be, it's a hard skill, I think, to
It
develop.
is, but I would add, if you're a domain expert, right? So and that's the difference is I would never go to ChatGPT now and say, tell me how to litigate a cross-border M&A deal where three of the subsidiaries, lied about. I'm not going to go ask ChatGPT to do that and then read it and then think I'm going to go into court to do that, right? Because that's not. I don't know. First of all, I don't know if it's right, right? And that's the difference is we are still human, and as long as humans are in the loop, we still need to take the time to analyze and understand it. Like when you hear about like jailhouse lawyers or people in jail, yeah, they have time. If you're a reasonably educated person and you have access to the library and you have 80 hours a week, I'm pretty sure you're going to come out with some good stuff. But in a world where things are more complicated now and moving and you have to have nuance, asking ChatGPT to do something, reading a 5-minute summary, and then thinking you're going to walk into a meeting and go toe to toe with experts on it, it's crazy, right? And like I said, where I was saying some outside counsel, because I talk to a lot of outside counsel and also in-house counsel, and I'm like, now part one of skill is like it's great that you use generative AI to come up with a draft of this report. We appreciate your efforts. Can you share some of the prompts or some of the ideas that you put in the prompt? And then you get that from them. And then you say, okay, these elements are great, blah, 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 blah. This is what's going to get you in trouble, right? So that's the new language. And immediately, I will say, like a year, 6 months ago, 8 months ago, I was irritated. I was like, please don't send me a generative AI contract, right? I'm just like, you're making me use my time. But now I'm like, okay, you want to take your first thought by doing the prompt, you're getting some ideas. That's great. Let's have a conversation. But if you tell me Chat GPT said this, I'm like, no. Chat GPT is just searching the web, right? And again, this is where I go back to legal tech and why I'm honestly excited about my current job is we're not trying to give bad data at LexisNexis. Our whole infrastructure will fall if we are putting bad data in bad legal data, bad legal analysis, bad legal guidance. If we're putting that into the system and people can't rely on what we have, then they might as well just use the web, right? So and that's where I have to say, I'm like, it's great you use the web. That's why it says searching the web. But there are documents and people who've thought deeply about this and who are up to date on current laws and regulations, and that's also fed into the system, and that's why you have the answer. So, and like I said, it's a new skill: learn, unlearn, relearn. One of the skills I'm learning is how to be patient with people who are using the tools and don't know what they're talking about, to be honest. But I won't do that. I'm not going to go out of my field. I'm not going to go and look physics and then go tell Neil deGrasse Tyson about physics and black holes. So that's where we are now. It's exciting, but and to kind of sort of add to that, but that's why I think communication and thinking and critical thinking, these core skills, I don't think will change. And being able to have a conversation, what were you thinking, what information, what did you feed in, that's more lawyering work now too. I mean, it's always been a part of it, but now it's even more important because you do want to validate them, and it's great that they did a first cut, great, or second or third, but now we're working together and trying to share knowledge. But
That is
some of my thoughts on that.
that is a great point to kind of bring this conversation to a close.
Yeah.
So I want to say thank you, but most importantly, happy birthday.
Thank you.
Happy
Yes.
birthday. Happy Friday. Maurice, thank you so much, and we'll be in touch. Peace. enjoying the podcast? If so, like, subscribe, or leave a review. Find the Legal Ops Podcast on your podcast app of choice, or select episodes and additional content on YouTube. And please do reach out with guest or topic recommendations. Thank you again.